The late autumn sky of October 2025 hung heavy and indifferent over the vast, sparsely defended industrial heartland of Russia. Far from the static, grinding trenches of the Donbas, a new asymmetrical front had been violently established, a campaign driven not by tanks and artillery, but by precision-guided unmanned aircraft systems. This was the apogee of the 45-day Ukrainian drone offensive, a strategic deep strike targeting the very financial arteries of the Kremlin's war machine. The goal, articulated by President Zelensky himself, was clear: to inflict systemic, sustained damage on the Russian energy sector, thereby restricting war financing derived from oil and gas revenues, which historically account for between one-third and one-half of the federal budget. Kyiv sought nothing less than a kinetic sanction aimed at slashing Russian oil refining capacity by 17 to 20%. The targets were fixed, stationary, and critically vulnerable. A network of 16 to 21 major oil refineries, pipelines, and key export terminals, stretching thousands of kilometers into Russian depth. The General Staff in Kyiv identified the operational constraint: Russia's reliance on complex, often Western-sourced processing equipment. Therefore, the strategic objective shifted from mere facility damage to irreversible capacity degradation. Ukrainian targeting focused relentlessly on primary processing units, specifically the atmospheric distillation columns, AVT units, which are notoriously difficult to replace or repair, especially under existing sanctions. Repeated strikes were implemented as the core operational tactic. Analysis showed that even destroying one of two identical distillation columns in a refinery could lead to a disproportionate drop, potentially a 30% reduction in gasoline output, even if the total paper capacity loss was less. This methodical focus on the bottleneck units ensured maximum systemic damage. The weapon of choice was the domestically produced long-range UAS. These drones, characterized by their 7.3-meter wingspans, were programmed for low-altitude penetration, designed to exploit the limitations of Russian radar detection, reducing their radar cross-section against ground clutter. Each drone carried a 50-kilogram high-explosive payload. Their navigational capability relied heavily on inertial navigation systems, pre-programmed with precise coordinates and updated using periodic intelligence. Crucially, this dependence on INS allowed them to bypass the extensive Russian electronic warfare systems designed to jam GPS signals and break drone data links. These were not remotely piloted aircraft. They were cost-effective, precision-guided cruise missiles capable of navigating themselves on standoff strikes ranging up to 2,000 kilometers.
Near the border, shielded by EW saturation and under the cover of a moonless night, the launch crews finalized their checklists. The primary strike package was divided into two major operational thrusts, one aimed at the persistently targeted heartland near Moscow, and the second, a bold trans-regional penetration strike aimed for the Gazprom Neftichim Salavat petrochemical plant in Bashkortostan, over 1,300 kilometers, 800 miles deep inside Russian airspace. In a reinforced Air Defense Command Post, ADCP, located near the Ryazan refinery, a colossal facility belonging to Rosneft that had already been hit 5 times since January, Captain Dmitry of the Panzer S-1 crew felt the tension mounting. The Ryazan plant supplied the capital, Moscow. Its protection was paramount. The local air defense network had been heavily augmented, but Dmitry knew the inherent weakness. Defending a vast, sprawling industrial complex with hard-kill systems was a logistical nightmare. "Too much clutter, too much EW noise," Dmitry muttered, adjusting the frequency on his radar screen. The heavy jamming used to combat GPS-guided systems inadvertently complicated the task of identifying small, low RCS targets flying at treetop level. The flight path to Salavat was the longest sustained mission yet, culminating in a strike on a plant that produced crucial liquid rocket fuel. As the drone formation, utilizing a swarm attack tactic to overwhelm defenses, entered the perimeter of the Bashkortostan facility, the low, persistent piston engine whine was the first warning. Inside the Salavat control center, the alarm klaxons blared the immediate threat level. "Incoming, low altitude, multiple vectors, speed check, 180 kph steady," a sensor operator yelled. Security forces, relying on hastily erected anti-drum netting and light anti-aircraft fire, were completely inadequate. The netting was designed to stop consumer-grade quadcopters, not 7.3-meter 50-kilogram kinetic projectiles. The lead drone executed its terminal guidance phase. The INS data locked the target, the Elu Avd 6 primary oil refining unit. 0416 hours, Salavat. The lead drone impacted the base of the towering distillation column. The kinetic energy ripped through the exterior armor plating. The 50-kilogram explosive charge detonated on a short delay fuse, designed not just to puncture, but to shatter the internal structure where superheated crude oil and gas condensates were pressurized. A split second later, the two follow-up drones punched through the breach created by the first, delivering their payloads into the exposed critical vessel. It was not a sharp, contained explosion, but a deep, churning thunder as thousands of liters of highly volatile hydrocarbons found oxygen and extreme heat. A colossal pillar of fire, a blinding mix of orange, white, and blue, erupted from the unit, ascending hundreds of meters into the pre-dawn sky. The immediate thermal load buckled adjacent pipework and ancillary compressor stations. The smell of burning sulfur, crude oil, and molten metal was immediately sickening, carried on the updraft.
The strike successfully crippled the LU-AVT-6 unit, damaging a major national petrochemical plant that processes up to 10 million tons of oil annually. Simultaneously, the second drone formation reached the Rosneft Ryazan refinery. This facility, one of Russia's largest, had been targeted consistently to ensure repairs could never stabilize output. Captain Dmitry tracked the faint traces on his Pantsir radar screen. He cursed the necessity of widespread GPS jamming, which turned his sophisticated radar image into frequency soup. "Engaging designated Vector 5. Fire solution now," Dmitry screamed. The 30mm high-explosive incendiary rounds from the Panzer systems scythed through the air, their tracer paths glowing green. Two drone decoys were vaporized instantly, their components raining down as white-hot shrapnel. But the primary attack element, 3 drones, had used the decoy's engagement as cover, flying a tight terrain-following profile to exploit the radar shadow. Their INS lock was maintained on the AVT-3 and AVT-4 primary distillation units. 0430 hours, Ryazan. The drones converged. The first drone, aiming for a structural weak point, delivered a devastating kinetic impact. The second and third followed, ensuring the total annihilation of the primary processing capacity. The target structure, responsible for half of the refinery's total capacity, exploded in a brutal flash that momentarily eclipsed the horizon. The destruction forced Rosneft to cut production by roughly half at Ryazan. The cumulative effect of these repeated strikes was a strategic victory, crippling Moscow's primary fuel source and forcing a diversion of refined products from other regions to prevent immediate shortages in the capital. The campaign reached its climax on the occupied Crimean Peninsula in October 2025. The Feodosia oil terminal was the Russian military's critical logistical hub for the southern front, capable of holding up to 250,000 tons of fuel. On the night of October 13, a Ukrainian drone strike, confirmed by the security service SBU, targeted this massive storage facility, located approximately 250 kilometers, 155 miles, from Ukraine-controlled territory. The attack was characterized by sheer saturation and payload mass. Drones were confirmed to have hit 5 massive reservoirs simultaneously. The acoustic signature was immense, not the crackle of small arms fire, but the deep, resonant ripping sound of massive steel fuel tanks being breached and structurally failing. The initial explosions instantly released tens of thousands of tons of volatile diesel and gasoline. The blaze was apocalyptic. Flames engulfed the entire terminal area. The fire became so vast and intense that occupation authorities were unable to bring it under control for 2 full days. A colossal plume of putrid, toxic black smoke ascended into the atmosphere, a terrifying column visible from over 25 kilometers, 15 miles, away.
This was the decisive moment of kinetic logistics disruption. The loss of Feodosia, the single largest fuel storage facility in Crimea, immediately crippled Russia's ability to supply the southern group of forces. The fire became the visually defining symbol of the campaign's success. As the fire raged uncontrollably, Russian forces were scrambling, forcing the evacuation of more than 800 local residents from the area.
The cumulative toll of the 45-day campaign was immediate and systemic. By October 2025, the estimated reduction in Russia's operational refining capacity reached 17 to 20%, translating to a loss of approximately 1.1 million barrels per day. Total refining output fell to below 5 million barrels per day, the lowest level since early 2022. The most profound economic consequence was the logistical bottleneck. Russia was now unable to process its own crude oil, leading to a state of overloaded crude oil storage. The state-owned pipeline monopoly, Transneft, was compelled to issue warnings to producers about potential output cuts if further damage occurred. Refined product exports cratered. Fuel exports overall dropped to 1.88 million barrels per day, the lowest level since early 2022. Exports of naphtha, a key petrochemical feedstock, plunged 43% month-on-month. In response to the domestic crisis, Russia extended its ban on gasoline exports through the end of 2025 and was forced to contemplate importing fuel from Asia, China, and Belarus to cover shortages. The Kremlin, losing billions in revenue daily, faced the severe blow to its war budget. The war, once a distant operation for many Russians, became a daily physical hardship. Reports detailed long queues of vehicles at filling stations in major cities, including Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the occupied regions. Images surfaced showing signs reading 92, no petrol, and 95, pump not working, in regions like Nizhny Novgorod and Samara. In Crimea, the situation was desperate. Authorities implemented rationing of 20 liters, 5.3 gallons per car, and locals reported fistfights at gas stations fueled by scarcity and frustration. Prices for gasoline surged 20 to 30%. The emotional fallout was palpable. Ordinary Russians like Valentin in the Ryazan region, who had seen or heard all 6 attacks on his local refinery, expressed profound psychological fatigue and fear. "We're feeling down already, awaiting a universal F-up," he stated, reflecting the sudden realization that their core infrastructure could not be protected. The sight of continuous toxic plumes of smoke and the constant threat of mobile network shutdowns, up to 71% of Russians experienced outages in August to counter drones, turned daily life into a strained experience. The Ukrainian drone campaign against Russian energy infrastructure was a resounding strategic success in asymmetric warfare. By utilizing self-developed, low-cost UAS to strike high-value stationary targets, Kyiv exposed a fundamental vulnerability in Russia's military-industrial complex and centralized economic model. The primary damage was not merely the initial blast, but the long-term systemic disruption. Experts warned that the effects would be protracted, with refining output unlikely to return to normal levels before June 2026 due to the inability to source specialized Western repair components. This campaign achieved a dual strategic effect. It inflicted devastating financial pain, draining the Kremlin's war chest by billions, and it forced the diversion of vital air defense assets from the front lines to defend static economic targets hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. The oil front proved that the battlefield had expanded far beyond the line of contact. As the narrative closes, the camera pans across the burned, twisted metal of the Feodosia terminal, a scene of quiet, lasting devastation. The neutral observer recognizes the grim lesson. The ability of Russia to wage its full-scale invasion is now inextricably linked to the integrity of its industrial pipes and columns. The Kinetic Sanction, imposed by drones with a 50-kilogram warhead, has proven to be the most effective pressure point, forcing the largest reduction in Russia's fuel exports since the invasion began. The war has been brought home, not by invading armies, but by the relentless, low-altitude penetration of technology.